Some stories demand to be told, not for the glory of the storyteller, but for the truth they carry within them. My name is Amelia Foster, and for months I've wrestled with how to share what happened to me, an experience so profound, so transformative, that it completely shattered and then rebuilt my understanding of life, death, and everything that lies between. I used to be what many would call a normal person. I taught third grade at Riverside Elementary in Burlington, Vermont, lived in a cozy colonial house with my husband Thomas, and spent weekends tending to my flower garden or volunteering at our local church. My faith was comfortable, predictable, the kind that showed up for Sunday service but rarely ventured into the deeper waters of spiritual exploration. I believed in God, yes, but in the way one believes in gravity, a distant force that kept things in order without requiring much personal investment. That all changed in the fall of 2023, but the story really begins a few months earlier, in July, when the headaches started. At first, they were easy to dismiss. As any teacher knows, headaches come with the territory, especially during summer workshop weeks when we're preparing for the new school year. But these were different. They came with a bone-deep fatigue that sleep couldn't touch, and bruises that appeared without explanation. Thomas noticed first. His software engineer's mind naturally attuned to patterns. "Amelia," he said one morning, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. "That's the third time this week you've needed a nap before dinner." I remember laughing it off, but something in his eyes, concern mixed with fear, made me schedule the appointment that would change everything. The waiting room at Burlington Medical Center was painted in those typical institutional colors meant to be soothing, but somehow achieving the opposite. I can still smell the antiseptic air, still feel the crinkle of the paper beneath me as Dr. Harrison performed the initial examination. When the blood work came back, the numbers told a story that nobody wanted to read. Acute myeloid leukemia, AML. The words fell like stones in a still pond, sending ripples through every aspect of our lives. I was 34 years old, had never smoked, exercised regularly, ate organic food. The list of "why me" factors stretched endlessly, but cancer, I would learn, doesn't care about our carefully constructed narratives of fairness. The next 3 months became a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and prayers that seemed to bounce off an indifferent ceiling. My third grade class would start the year with a substitute teacher, my garden would bloom and wither without my tending, and Thomas would learn to navigate the terrifying world of medical terminology and insurance claims. What strikes me now, looking back, is how quickly the human spirit adapts to the unthinkable. The hospital became our second home, its rhythms as familiar as our own heartbeats. The nurses on the oncology floor, Sarah with her terrible puns, Marcus who always smuggled in extra pudding cups, and Elena who would sit with me during the long nights when sleep evaded me, became our extended family. Thomas transformed before my eyes, his natural introversion giving way to fierce advocacy. He questioned doctors, researched treatment options late into the night, and never once let me see him cry. Though Elena told me later that she often found him in the hospital chapel, shoulders shaking in silent prayer. Our church community rallied around us in those months. Meals appeared on our doorstep with clockwork regularity. Prayer chains formed. Our pastor, Richard, visited weekly, though I could tell the sight of me, gradually losing weight and hair, shook his theological foundations. How does one reconcile a loving God with the suffering of his children? It's a question as old as faith itself, but it hits differently when it's not theoretical anymore. My mother flew in from Arizona, taking leave from her job as a high school counselor. She tried to hide her fear behind a flurry of activity, cleaning our house, organizing my medications, cooking enough food to feed an army. But I would catch her sometimes, standing in the doorway of my hospital room, her hand pressed against her mouth, looking at me the way mothers do when they'd give anything to take their child's pain away. The treatments were aggressive, but the cancer was more so. By September, it became clear that the standard protocols weren't working as hoped. My oncologist, Dr. Patel, a woman whose gentle demeanor belied her brilliant mind, presented us with options, none of them particularly promising. The best chance, she explained, was a new experimental procedure, a combination of targeted therapy and stem cell transplantation. "It's aggressive," she said, her dark eyes holding mine steadily. "And I won't sugarcoat it. The risks are significant. But given your age and overall health, you're an ideal candidate." The surgery was scheduled for October 15th. I remember the date clearly because it was the day after our wedding anniversary. Thomas and I spent that evening in my hospital room, sharing a contraband cupcake that Sarah had smuggled in. The autumn sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, visible through the window that had become my primary view of the world. "Remember our honeymoon?" Thomas asked, his finger tracing patterns on my palm. "That sunset in Maui?" I did remember. We'd spent hours on the beach, planning our future. The house we'd buy, the children we'd have, the life we'd build together. None of those plans had included this detour, but as Thomas squeezed my hand, I realized that maybe this too was part of our story, though we couldn't see the ending yet. That night, after Thomas left and the hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm of muted conversations and soft footsteps, I had a strange moment of clarity. Looking out at the city lights twinkling beneath a star-studded sky, I felt an inexplicable sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't resignation or acceptance. It was something deeper, as if some part of me knew that whatever happened the next day would be exactly what needed to happen. I spent those quiet hours writing letters, to Thomas, to my parents, to my students. Not goodbye letters exactly, but letters of gratitude, of love, of the kind of truth that sometimes only emerges when we're forced to face our own mortality. I wrote about the joy I'd found in teaching, the miracle of watching young minds unfold like flowers reaching for the sun. I wrote about the deep, steady love I shared with Thomas, how it had grown stronger rather than weaker in the face of this crisis. I wrote about faith, not the comfortable Sunday morning kind, but the raw, desperate kind that emerges in hospital rooms at 3 a.m. The night nurse, Elena, found me still writing as dawn began to paint the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold. She didn't say anything, just sat with me for a while, her presence a comfort in the liminal space between night and day. "The sunrise is beautiful," she finally said, her Colombian accent soft in the quiet room. "Every sunrise is beautiful when you don't know how many more you'll see," I replied, surprising myself with the words. She took my hand then, her brown eyes filled with something that wasn't quite pity, but wasn't quite hope either. "Señora Amelia," she said, using her special nickname for me. "Sometimes the darkest nights bring the most beautiful dawns." I didn't know then how prophetic those words would prove to be. The morning of the surgery arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that Vermont does so well. The leaves outside my window had turned to fire, bright oranges, deep reds, brilliant golds. The sort of day that usually would have found me taking my class on a nature walk, collecting leaves for art projects, teaching them about chlorophyll and seasonal changes. Instead, I watched the sunrise from my hospital bed as the pre-surgery preparations began around me. The routine was familiar by now, the checking of vital signs, the review of medical history, the signing of consent forms. Dr. Patel came by early, her white coat immaculate as always. "Are you ready?" she asked, her hand warm on my shoulder. I nodded, though ready seemed like an inadequate word for what I was feeling. How can anyone be truly ready to place their life in the hands of others, to surrender completely to the unknown? Thomas arrived as the nurses were preparing my IV, his face showing the strain of too many sleepless nights, but his eyes steady with love. He had taken to wearing the blue sweater I had given him last Christmas. His lucky sweater, he called it now, though I suspected he wore it because he knew it was my favorite. "I'll be right here waiting," he promised, his voice rough with emotion as he squeezed my hand one last time before they wheeled me toward the operating room. The journey through the hospital corridors felt like a strange dream. The fluorescent lights overhead passed in a rhythmic pattern, creating a strobe-like effect that made everything seem slightly surreal. The operating room staff moved with practiced efficiency, their faces mostly hidden behind masks, their voices calm and professional as they transferred me to the operating table. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Klein according to his name tag, explained the procedure as he prepared his equipment. His voice was kind, almost paternal, as he described how the anesthesia would work. The cold sensation of the IV in my arm was familiar by now, though the knowledge of what was to come made it feel more significant somehow. "Just relax, doctor," Klein said, patting my shoulder. "When you wake up, all of this will be behind you." As the medication began to flow through my veins, bringing with it that familiar heaviness, I found myself thinking about Elena's words about beautiful dawns after dark nights. The ceiling above me began to blur, the voices around me growing distant. The last thing I remember thinking was a simple prayer. "God, I trust you." Then everything went dark. What happened next would change not just my life, but my entire understanding of reality itself. But that's another part of the story, one that still fills me with awe and wonder every time I think about it. What I didn't know then, as consciousness slipped away from me, was that I was about to embark on a journey that would take me far beyond the confines of that operating room, beyond the boundaries of what I thought was possible, and into a realm of existence that most people never get to experience, at least not until their final journey home. But first, I had to die. The transition from consciousness to unconsciousness is usually a gradual fading, like a song slowly diminishing into silence. But what happened next was different. It was as if someone had suddenly switched on a light in a dark room, only the light wasn't external. It was coming from within. The first thing I noticed was the complete absence of pain. For months, pain had been my constant companion, an unwelcome friend who never left my side. Its sudden absence was so striking that for a moment, it was all I could focus on. I felt lighter somehow, as if gravity had loosened its hold on me, like a balloon slowly lifting from a child's grasp. That's when I realized I could see my own body. I was hovering near the ceiling of the operating room, looking down at the scene below with a strange detachment. It wasn't frightening, though I imagine it should have been. Instead, it felt natural, as if I was finally seeing things from the correct perspective. The surgical team moved with urgent precision around my physical form, their actions synchronized like dancers in a complex ballet. Dr. Patel's voice cut through the methodical beeping of machines. "BP's dropping. We need to stabilize her now." I wanted to tell them I was fine. Better than fine, actually. I felt more alive than I had in months, maybe years. But before I could process this thought, something began to change. The operating room started to fade around me, not into darkness, but into something else, something more real than what we typically think of as reality. The transition was gentle, but insistent, like being carried by a current in a warm ocean. I began moving through what I can only describe as a tunnel, though that word feels inadequate. It was as if reality itself had folded into a passage of pure light. The light wasn't harsh or blinding. Instead, it was alive, intelligent, pulsing with love and purpose. Colors I had never seen before danced through this light. Colors that don't exist in our physical spectrum. Colors that seemed to carry meaning and emotion within them. As I moved through this tunnel of living light, I became aware of a presence beside me. This is where human language begins to fail. Because how do you describe a being that exists beyond the physical realm? The closest I can come is to say it was an angel, but not the kind you see in Renaissance paintings or on Christmas cards. This being was pure light and consciousness, radiating a peace that defied description. I knew, with a certainty that transcended physical knowledge, that this was my guardian angel who had been with me my entire life. 8 minutes and 45 seconds, the angel communicated, though not with words as we know them. It was more like the thought appeared directly in my consciousness. When I expressed confusion, the angel explained, "That's how long your heart has been stopped. But time here, it works differently." The angel was right. Time had become fluid, elastic. What felt like hours could have been seconds in earthly time, or perhaps what felt like moments stretched across earthly hours. In this realm, time wasn't a river flowing in one direction, but an ocean in which all moments existed simultaneously. The tunnel opened into what I can only describe as the outskirts of heaven, though even that description falls short. The beauty was overwhelming, not just visually, but on every level of perception. The ground beneath me, though I'm not sure I was actually standing, seemed to pulse with life and joy. The air itself was filled with music, not the kind we hear with our ears, but the kind we feel in our souls. It was as if all the most beautiful symphonies ever written were merely pale echoes of this eternal song. In this place, I could see how everything was connected. Love wasn't just an emotion or an action. It was the very fabric of reality, the force that bound everything together. Every prayer ever uttered, every act of kindness ever performed, every moment of grace. I could see them all as threads in a vast tapestry of divine purpose. Then I saw him. How do you describe encountering the source of all love, all life, all existence? How do you put into words a meeting that transcends the very concept of words? Jesus stood before me, and the love that radiated from his presence was beyond anything I could have imagined in my earthly life. It was pure, unconditional, and so powerful it brought me to my knees. Though again, I'm not sure I had knees in any physical sense. His face shone with a light that should have been blinding, but somehow I could look directly at him. His eyes held all the wisdom of the universe, yet they were filled with such tender compassion that I felt completely known and completely loved. Every flaw, every mistake, every doubt I'd ever had, he knew them all, and he loved me not in spite of them, but with them, through them, beyond them. "Welcome home, my child," he said, and his voice resonated through every part of my being. It was like hearing every language ever spoken all at once, yet understanding perfectly. Each word carried layers of meaning that would take lifetimes to fully comprehend. I began to weep, but these weren't physical tears. They were tears of joy, of homecoming, of finally understanding. Every question I had ever had about my faith, every doubt that had ever crossed my mind, they all dissolved in his presence. This was about love in its purest, most fundamental form. In his presence, I understood things that had puzzled humanity for millennia. I saw how our limited human perspectives could never fully grasp the vastness of divine love and purpose. I saw how every struggle, every pain, every moment of darkness served a greater purpose. Not because God caused them, but because he could work through them, transform them, redeem them. I saw my life spread out before me, not as a linear progression of events, but as a magnificent tapestry where every thread, every color, every apparent mistake was essential to the overall design. I saw how the cancer that I thought was destroying my life was actually part of a larger pattern, leading me to this moment of transformation. The most profound revelation wasn't about the afterlife or even about God. It was about love. I understood that love wasn't just an emotion or a choice. It was the fundamental force of the universe, the energy that created and sustained all things. Every act of love, no matter how small, rippled through eternity. Every moment of compassion, every gesture of kindness, every choice to forgive. These were the things that truly mattered. In his presence, I also saw the spiritual realm that exists alongside our physical world. I saw angels moving among humans, unseen but ever present. I saw how prayers rose like incense, creating patterns of light and energy that affected the physical world in ways we can't perceive with our limited senses. I saw how every soul was connected, how every life touched countless others in an intricate dance of divine choreography. But I also saw something that broke my heart. I saw how many people were walking through life completely unaware of the spiritual reality surrounding them. I saw souls weighted down by burdens they were never meant to carry, people searching for fulfillment in places it could never be found, hearts hardened by pain and disappointment. Jesus began to show me specific events unfolding in the world, things that would shake many people's faith, challenges that would test our collective resilience. But these visions weren't meant to frighten, they were meant to prepare. I saw how these trials would ultimately lead to the greatest spiritual awakening in human history. "This is why you must return," Jesus said, his voice both gentle and firm. "The message you must share is this: time is shorter than my children realize. The world is changing rapidly, and many of my people are spiritually asleep. Tell them to wake up. Tell them that I am not just a historical figure or a religious concept. I am alive, and I am moving powerfully in this hour." He showed me how every prayer was heard, how every tear was counted, how every act of faith created ripples in both the spiritual and physical realms. I saw how heaven was far more real and immediate than most people imagine. Not a distant place we go when we die, but a reality that exists alongside us, separated only by the thinnest of veils. The love I experienced in his presence was overwhelming, all-encompassing. It wasn't just divine love. It was the love of a father for his child, a creator for his creation, a shepherd for his sheep. It was personal and universal at the same time, intimate, yet infinite. In this place, I could see how everything was connected. Love wasn't just an emotion or an action. It was the very fabric of reality, the force that bound everything together. Every prayer ever uttered, every act of kindness ever performed, every moment of grace. I could see them all as threads in a vast tapestry of divine purpose. Then I saw him. How do you describe encountering the source of all love, all life, all existence? How do you put into words a meeting that transcends the very concept of words? Jesus stood before me, and the love that radiated from his presence was beyond anything I could have imagined in my earthly life. It was pure, unconditional, and so powerful it brought me to my knees. Though again, I'm not sure I had knees in any physical sense. His face shone with a light that should have been blinding, but somehow I could look directly at him. His eyes held all the wisdom of the universe, yet they were filled with such tender compassion that I felt completely known and completely loved. Every flaw, every mistake, every doubt I'd ever had, he knew them all, and he loved me not in spite of them, but with them, through them, beyond them. "Welcome home, my child," he said, and his voice resonated through every part of my being. It was like hearing every language ever spoken all at once, yet understanding perfectly. Each word carried layers of meaning that would take lifetimes to fully comprehend. I began to weep, but these weren't physical tears. They were tears of joy, of homecoming, of finally understanding. Every question I had ever had about my faith, every doubt that had ever crossed my mind, they all dissolved in his presence. This was about love in its purest, most fundamental form. In his presence, I understood things that had puzzled humanity for millennia. I saw how our limited human perspectives could never fully grasp the vastness of divine love and purpose. I saw how every struggle, every pain, every moment of darkness served a greater purpose. Not because God caused them, but because He could work through them, transform them, redeem them. I saw my life spread out before me, not as a linear progression of events, but as a magnificent tapestry where every thread, every color, every apparent mistake was essential to the overall design. I saw how the cancer that I thought was destroying my life was actually part of a larger pattern, leading me to this moment of transformation. The most profound revelation wasn't about the afterlife or even about God. It was about love. I understood that love wasn't just an emotion or a choice. It was the fundamental force of the universe, the energy that created and sustained all things. Every act of love, no matter how small, rippled through eternity. Every moment of compassion, every gesture of kindness, every choice to forgive. These were the things that truly mattered. In His presence, I also saw the spiritual realm that exists alongside our physical world. I saw angels moving among humans, unseen but ever present. I saw how prayers rose like incense, creating patterns of light and energy that affected the physical world in ways we can't perceive with our limited senses. I saw how every soul was connected, how every life touched countless others in an intricate dance of divine choreography. But I also saw something that broke my heart. I saw how many people were walking through life completely unaware of the spiritual reality surrounding them. I saw souls weighted down by burdens they were never meant to carry, people searching for fulfillment in places it could never be found, hearts hardened by pain and disappointment. Jesus began to show me specific events unfolding in the world, things that would shake many people's faith, challenges that would test our collective resilience. But these visions weren't meant to frighten, they were meant to prepare. I saw how these trials would ultimately lead to the greatest spiritual awakening in human history. "This is why you must return," Jesus said, His voice both gentle and firm. "The message you must share is this: time is shorter than my children realize. The world is changing rapidly, and many of my people are spiritually asleep. Tell them to wake up. Tell them that I am not just a historical figure or a religious concept. I am alive, and I am moving powerfully in this hour." He showed me how every prayer was heard, how every tear was counted, how every act of faith created ripples in both the spiritual and physical realms. I saw how heaven was far more real and immediate than most people imagine. Not a distant place we go when we die, but a reality that exists alongside us, separated only by the thinnest of veils. The love I experienced in His presence was overwhelming, all-encompassing. It wasn't just divine love. It was the love of a father for his child, a creator for his creation, a shepherd for his sheep. It was personal and universal at the same time, intimate, yet infinite. This love knew everything about me, every mistake, every fear, every doubt, and loved me completely, unconditionally. "Lord," I managed to say, though not with physical words, "I don't want to leave this place." He smiled, and in that smile, I saw the love that created the universe. "I know, beloved, but you have more work to do." He then showed me something that still brings me to tears when I remember it. He showed me how He is present in every moment of our lives, how His love never wavers, even when we can't feel it. I saw how even in our darkest moments, He is working everything together for our good, weaving a tapestry of divine purpose from even our mistakes and failures. The vision expanded, and I saw how the spiritual realm interpenetrates our physical world. I saw how angels move among us, how spiritual battles rage unseen, how every prayer creates waves of light and energy that affect both realms. I saw how our worship, our acts of kindness, our choices to love despite difficulty, All of these things had far greater impact than we could imagine. "Remember," he said, "what you have seen is not just for you. It is for those who will hear through you. The time is short, and every soul matters. Tell them that my return is nearer than they think, but it is not fear that should drive them. It is love, my love for them, and their love for me." As he spoke these words, I felt myself being drawn back. The pull was gentle but persistent, like a tide returning to shore. "Wait," I cried out. "There's so much more I want to ask." His final words to me were both a comfort and a commission. "You will remember what you need to remember. The rest will unfold as it should. Trust in my love and share what you have seen. Those who have ears to hear will hear." The return journey was faster than the departure, but just as gentle. The tunnel of light seemed to fold in on itself, and suddenly I was back in the operating room. But I wasn't looking down from above anymore. I was back in my body, gasping for air as the surgical team stared in amazement. The monitors that had been flatlining suddenly sprang to life. The team that had been preparing to pronounce time of death now rushed to stabilize my vital signs. 8 minutes and 45 seconds, exactly as my guardian angel had said. But I wasn't the same person who had left that operating room. I had been transformed, not just spiritually, but physically as well. The cancer that had been killing me was gone. Every cell in my body renewed by divine touch. The doctors would later confirm this miracle, though they had no scientific explanation for it. I had died on that operating table, but what I experienced wasn't death. It was more life than I had ever known. And the message I brought back would change not just my life, but the lives of countless others who were ready to hear it. Coming back to physical consciousness was like emerging from the depths of an ocean into bright sunlight. The first sensation was the return of weight, the heavy reality of existing in a physical body after experiencing the weightless freedom of the spiritual realm. The surgical team's voices came into focus gradually, their tones shifting from urgent concern to amazement. "She's back," I heard Dr. Patel say, her professional composure barely containing her astonishment. "Vital signs stabilizing. This is incredible." But what truly was incredible wasn't just my return. It was what the subsequent tests would reveal. The aggressive leukemia that had been destroying my body was simply gone. Not in remission, not diminished. Gone. Every test, every scan showed completely normal, healthy tissue where cancer had been flourishing just hours before. The medical team was baffled, running test after test, looking for some scientific explanation for what they were seeing. Dr. Patel sat with Thomas and me 3 days after the surgery, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of wonderment. "In all my years of practice," she said, shaking her head as she reviewed my latest results, "I've never seen anything like this. By all medical understanding, this is impossible." Thomas squeezed my hand, tears streaming down his face. He had been by my side constantly since I regained consciousness, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair, barely leaving even to eat. "I don't care if it's impossible," he said. "I'm just grateful you're still here." But I was more than just still here. I was transformed, not just physically, but spiritually and mentally as well. The conversation with Jesus, so much richer and deeper than I could fully convey in human language, had fundamentally altered my understanding of reality itself. His words continued to unfold in my consciousness, like a flower gradually revealing its petals. One of the most profound aspects of our conversation had been about the nature of time and eternity. "My children," he had explained, "see time as a straight line, past, present, future. But from heaven's perspective, it's more like a tapestry where every moment exists simultaneously, woven together in a pattern of divine purpose." He had shown me how every moment of my life, Even the painful ones, even the cancer, had been threads in this tapestry. "Nothing is wasted," he had said, his voice resonating with both authority and tenderness. "Every tear, every struggle, every moment of doubt, I use it all. The cancer that you thought was destroying your life was actually preparing you for this moment, this message." The message he had given me was both simple and profound. Tell them that I am closer than they think. Tell them that no matter how far they feel they have strayed, one sincere cry of their heart will bring them back to my embrace. Tell them that in this critical hour, I am making myself known in unprecedented ways to those who truly seek me. He had shown me specific events that would unfold in the world: natural disasters, social upheavals, technological advances that would challenge traditional faith. But these revelations weren't meant to frighten, they were meant to prepare. "These things must happen," he had explained, "but my children need not fear. Those who stay close to me will be given strength and wisdom for the days ahead." The most beautiful part of our conversation had been about love, not the limited human understanding of love, but divine love in its purest form. He had shown me how this love permeates every aspect of creation, how it holds the universe together, how it transforms everything it touches. "The greatest tragedy," he had said, "is not that people don't receive this love. It's that they don't realize it's already theirs." After my release from the hospital, the challenge became how to integrate these profound spiritual truths into daily life. How do you go grocery shopping when you've walked in heaven? How do you handle routine tasks when you've experienced the presence of God in such an intimate way? The answer, I learned, was that you do these things with new eyes, with a deeper awareness of the sacred in the ordinary. That checker at the grocery store, I could now see the divine spark in her, could sense the battles she was fighting, could feel God's love for her as tangibly as I could feel the cold air from the frozen food section. My return to teaching was delayed as news of my miraculous recovery spread. People began reaching out, first a few, then dozens, then hundreds. They came with questions, with doubts, with their own stories of supernatural encounters. Some were skeptical, some were hungry for hope, but all of them were searching for something deeper than their current experience of faith. I began sharing my story in small groups at first, in living rooms, in church basements, in hospital chapels. The response was overwhelming. People weren't just interested in the dramatic aspects of my experience, the tunnel of light, the out-of-body experience, the miraculous healing. They were hungry for the deeper message about God's love and presence in their daily lives. A particularly meaningful moment came when Elena, the night nurse who had sat with me before surgery, attended one of these gatherings. After hearing my full story, she pulled me aside, tears in her eyes. "Remember what I told you about the darkest nights bringing the most beautiful dawns?" she said. I had no idea how prophetic those words would be. Thomas, my steadfast husband, supported me through all of this while dealing with his own spiritual transformation. "It's one thing to believe in miracles in theory," he told me one evening as we sat on our porch watching the sunset. "It's another thing entirely to live with one." The changes in our lives weren't just spiritual. We found ourselves naturally simplifying, letting go of things that once seemed important, but now felt trivial. Material possessions, career ambitions, social status, all of these fell away in light of the greater purpose we had discovered. We didn't become hermits or ascetics. Rather, we learned to hold things loosely, to see everything through the lens of eternal perspective. Our marriage deepened in ways I couldn't have imagined. The love we shared had always been strong, but now it was illuminated by a greater understanding of divine love. We learned to see each other as God sees us, not perfect, but perfectly loved. Our conversations often lasted late into the night as we explored the implications of what I had experienced and what it meant for our lives going forward. My relationship with my students also transformed. When I finally returned to teaching, I found myself seeing each child through heaven's eyes, not just as students to be taught, but as eternal souls to be nurtured. The way I taught changed too. While still covering the required curriculum, I found ways to weave in deeper truths about love, purpose, and the sacred nature of life itself. One of the most significant changes was in my prayer life. Prayer was no longer a one-way conversation or a list of requests. It became a constant awareness of God's presence, a continuous dialogue with the divine. I could feel the reality of the spiritual realm alongside the physical, could sense the movement of angels, could see how prayers created ripples in both realms. The medical community continued to study my case. Papers were written, conferences held, theories proposed. But as Dr. Patel admitted in a follow-up visit 6 months later, sometimes we have to acknowledge that there are things beyond our current scientific understanding. Not everyone believed my story, of course. Some dismissed it as a hallucination, others as a psychological response to trauma. But as Jesus had told me, those who have ears to hear will hear. And they did hear. Letters and emails poured in from around the world. People sharing their own supernatural encounters, their own moments of divine intervention, their own stories of transformation. One letter particularly touched me. It came from a teenage girl in Minnesota who had been contemplating suicide. "When I heard your story," she wrote, "it wasn't the miracle that got to me. It was knowing that God loved me that much, that He saw me, knew me, and had a purpose for my life. That changed everything." The most challenging aspect of my return wasn't adjusting to physical life again. It was carrying the weight of what I had seen and heard, knowing that many would struggle to understand or believe it. But I've learned to trust in what Jesus told me. This message isn't for everyone, but it will reach those who are ready to receive it. The message isn't about fear or judgment or religious doctrine. It's about awakening to the reality that we are deeply loved and that our lives have profound purpose. It's about understanding that no matter what challenges we face, we are never alone. It's about recognizing that the spiritual realm is more real and immediate than most people imagine. As I write this final part of my story, sitting in my garden where new flowers bloom, I'm struck by how inadequate words are to convey the full depth of what I experienced. But perhaps that's part of the message too, that some truths can only be fully understood through direct experience, through personal encounter with the divine. The choice now lies with you, the reader. You can dismiss this as just another story, or you can allow it to awaken something in your spirit. You can continue with business as usual, or you can recognize that God is calling you to something deeper, something more real and authentic than perhaps you've ever experienced before. Remember, the most remarkable part of my story isn't the near-death experience, or even the miraculous healing. It's the message that every single person is profoundly loved by God, that every life has divine purpose, and that the veil between heaven and earth is thinner than most people realize. The time for lukewarm faith is over. The time for playing church is over. The time for spiritual sleep is over. God is moving in unprecedented ways, and He's inviting His people to be part of something greater than themselves. Will you hear? Will you respond? Will you wake up? The choice is yours, but remember what Jesus told me. Time is shorter than you think, and your decision matters more than you know. This is my testimony. This is my message. This is my call to you. Wake up, beloved. Wake up.